This is A View from the Bunker. Now, here's Derek Gilbert.
Will the Nephilim return and rule over humanity during the end times? There are some who interpret prophecy in Daniel chapter 2 that way, and we will discuss that this evening. Welcome to A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. Joining us is one of my favorite guests because our conversations are always fascinating, and I hope you find them fascinating and edifying as well. He's one of the very early outspoken voices pointing out the parallels between the UFO phenomenon, the alien abduction phenomenon, and we'll put alien in air quotes there, and the spiritual warfare, demonic oppression, demonic possession. He began researching this back in 1996, made a documentary that he's made freely available on his website, UFOs, Angels, and Gods, the website thinkagainproductions.com. And we welcome back to the program Ali Siadatan. Ali, thank you for joining us again tonight.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me, Derek. I look forward to our conversation.
Daniel chapter 2, this is the very interesting dream where Daniel's ability, granted by God, of course, because Daniel's very clear that this wasn't me, that this was, the one true God, Yahweh, who gave me this interpretation of your dream, which you didn't even tell me what it was, didn't tell his wise men either, and all the wise men of Babylon were basically executed on the orders of Nebuchadnezzar because he realized they were charlatans. Daniel saw and was given the dream and the interpretation of it. And this was the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had of the this immense image or statue or idol with a golden head, the torso of silver, let's see, am I getting it right here? The chest and arms of silver, middle and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, feet partly of iron and miry clay. And in verse 43, a verse that many of our friends have wrestled with for quite some time. Daniel 2, verse 43, as you saw the iron mixed with soft clay, so they will mix with one another in marriage, but they will not hold together, just as iron does not mix with clay. So we'll unpack this. What does it mean, and how does this relate to where we are going in the end times? Does this, in fact, mean the return of the demigods of the ancient world, the Nephilim? So This is something that I find very interesting because, of course, Daniel writing in the 6th century BC, probably a century or so after the Greek poet Hesiod, who, looking back through the history of the world, said that there were 4 ages of humanity. This was later repeated by the Roman poet Virgil in his 4th eclogue, or at least drew upon this. And as Hesiod pointed out, that there was a golden age when Kronos, who was also Saturn to the Romans, Baal-Hamon to the Phoenicians, many other names, ruled in heaven. Life was wonderful, and humanity benefited from very easy life. We received all good things without having to work for it. Interestingly, the term used by Hesiod and Homer to describe the men of the Golden Age, apparently, according to scholar Amar Anus, was derived from the Semitic root word behind the word Rephaim. So the demigods of the Greeks, they understood, were the Rephaim of the Canaanites and the Amorites. Interesting. Then there was the Silver Age where things weren't quite as good, the Bronze Age where things were really violent and terrible, and now we're living in the Iron Age where the gods make our lives miserable. It's really awful. Again, that was Hesiod, the Greek poet, from whom we know much of what we know about Greek religion, writing about a century before Daniel. Now, I don't think it's coincidental. I think Daniel was given the true version, and Hesiod was given sort of a fake news version.
Yes. As you know, this book was mainly written in Aramaic as opposed to the rest of the Bible. That's in Hebrew, because that was the lingua franca of empire. And one of the reasons I think in the Hebrew canon this book is actually not among the prophets, but in the scrolls, in the 3rd section of the Hebrew, it's the only book of prophecy that's plucked out and put in another section. I think because all the other books speak of the story of Israel, the future of Israel, and of her Messiah and the Messianic kingdom, but this one speaks of the age of Gentile empires, and it's written in the language, the international language of diplomacy at the time. So I think the Lord draws from the metaphors and symbols that existed at that time to speak of such things. For instance, the animals, the beasts that you see in this book. Often you see in the sculptings of ancient world, like I remember seeing in Persepolis, there's a one animal eating another. I forget the two animals, but there's one in eating the other, and it represents Persia taking Babylon. So this was how they spoke of this thing. This was their language. And so the Lord is saying, okay, let me take the language you understand and let me speak into it, the truth. Another idea that's recently come to me about the metals going from, gold to iron, I think that the empires of the world, both individually per empire and the entire imperial system from Babylon to the Second Coming, in a way follow the lifespan of a person. There's youth, like you're an infant, then there's youth, there's middle age, and there's old age. And there's decay and death. Empires work that way. Just like people, they have phases of life. So ironically, the genesis of it, the glory of it in the land of Shinar, in Babylon, it's the gold. Everything is just starting. It's all energy. And then as it kind of progresses, even though it grows in scope and eventually covers the whole planet like today, yet the quality keeps diminishing and aging, so that now we are perhaps in the old age of empire of the world, even though as the eternal new creation of the God's kingdom is ever spry and born again and ready to be the new creation in life, the age of empire is decaying like an old person and ready to die and be hit by the pebble that bring it all down. Mm-hmm. So I think it's also maybe talking about the decaying and the passage of time. And of course, there's more mysteries in the metal that I think need more study.
Of course, Hesiod didn't write anything about the mixing of iron and miry clay, and that's something that has really intrigued prophecy students, those who understand the Genesis 6 paradigm, where the fallen Elohim, the watchers according to the book of 1 Enoch, the sons of God in Genesis chapter 6, came down and commingled their seed with human seed, and see in Daniel chapter 2 an echo of what happened there in Genesis chapter 6. There are people on both sides of that issue, and this has been debated for the last 2,500 years, I'm sure. Where do you come down on that particular question? What was Daniel 2:43 about?
Yes. Yeah, that's a great question. What is it about? So I think that, someone once said that a text without context is a pretext. So it's important to lay the context of what is that passage talking about. And as you said, it is talking about the empires of the world. And as you made a connection between the metals and the Rephaim, and it's possible that in fact those metals perhaps have that idea in them until we get to the clay, where man is made of clay, going back to the creation of Adam. Right. There might be that in there, but it's talking about the empires of the world, and it's saying, look, the first one, you, O king of Babylon, you are the head of gold. And then it's saying that there's one that will come after you, and that's the chest. And we know that after Babylon, Babylon was not only conquered by Medo-Persia, but according to the book of Jeremiah and the book of Daniel, it was given by God's authority, because God is the authority over all the spiritual authorities, including the fallen angels. Even like Satan says to the Lord, dominion has been given to me over all the kingdoms of the earth. It has been given to me over all the kingdoms of the earth, and I'll give them to whoever I will. So there's hierarchy, it's still true. So God says, no, Persia and Media take Babylon. And then we see the stomach of bronze and the legs and the thighs of bronze, and we see the Hellenistic empire of Alexander, and eventually his four generals coming. And then, of course, we see Rome that takes Athens in 116 BC, and that's the legs. And Rome divides into east and west. And for me, Rome continues. It never really stops. It in the east, it lasts all the way till the 15th century, the city of Constantinopolis. In the west, it goes through a transition and a rebirth with the Holy Roman Empire of Charlemagne, and from there the different heads get a go at it. The different European heads. Mm-hmm. It's as though the Lord said to Abraham, "Those who bless you, I'll bless, and those who curse you, I'll curse." So when Rome gathered around Jerusalem and destroyed the temple and scattered the Jewish people, God did the same to Rome, broke it into pieces and scattered it. And so you kind of follow these pieces, each one of them on autopilot has that imperial thing and starts to come up, the Spanish, the Portuguese, the French under Napoleon, and then the English. And then, of course, the English then divide into the continents, and the scepter of America, of the District of Columbia, maybe is the next, manifestation of Western Rome, the sign of the eagle and all of that. And Eastern Rome goes into, well, the Muslim Ottomans take Eastern Rome, and they turn into Istanbul. The princess of the house of Istanbul, of Constantinople, marries into the Tsar of Russia, and the Russians say from now on we will be the new Rome, the third Rome they call themselves. And actually I'm reading right now a book on the history of the Orthodox Church, and it's right there. It says, and they call themselves the third Rome. And so the two-headed eagle of Byzantium becomes the symbol of Russia.
Right.
And so the Rome expands and goes from kind of Moscow to DC. That's how I see it. And we are still in the Fourth Empire, and what the Jews actually call the Fourth Exile. And it's funny how we see it as empires, but they see it as exiles. And so we are still in the context of it. And this Fourth Exile is bookended by the Messiah himself on both ends. Rome, he was here 2,000 years ago, and he'll be here kind of at the end of it, because we are in the Messianic age. And so Rome has been transformed by the giving of the Holy Spirit, by the message of God, and by the defeat of the gods or the fallen angels. So a lot has happened, but now suddenly we come to this age of history, and we wonder, are we really at the ends of the statue? Are we getting close to the part where the iron mixes with the clay and leads us to the 10 toes? Is that where we are when it comes to history? And so we look deeper into that. And now when I look at that verse, and I was actually looking to the Aramaic today earlier, and talking to a friend of mine who's can read Hebrew and Aramaic, and we're kind of talking about it, and I was reading commentaries from old Jewish scholars, see what they had to say. And what I like is that the translation of the King James Version I find very accurate in this particular case. I don't get obsessed with translations. I usually study a verse that I'm looking into. I usually study it in as many translations I can put my hand on, and then I go into the original languages, and then I look at commentaries. But there's two different versions I'm going to bring up for us today right now. One is the King James Version, and whereas thou sawest iron mixed with murry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. So it talks about they, something other than something, it's masculine plural. They shall mingle themselves with what? With the seed of men. Now, I looked at this other translation, which is actually a Hebrew translation, meaning it's not even a Christian, translation. It's not a Christian Bible; it's a Hebrew Bible. But I was just curious, and this is how they've translated the. Okay. There says, "You saw iron mixed with common clay." That means they shall intermingle with the offspring of men, but shall not hold together, just as iron does not mix with clay. They shall intermingle with the offspring of men. And the King James says, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men.
Right.
And the next verse, I think, also adds important context. And in the days of these kings, which kings? You get the impression those born of the intermingling. And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and her kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Now, again, context is important, and you have to see it in the context of the whole counsel of God. We know that in the book of Revelation, we are told about 10 horns. of the dragon. And so we can see that the 10 horns, since God remains consistent in his allegories and metaphors, so that we can actually understand the 10 toes and the 10 horns are reflecting each other. And so these kings are 10 in number, because now we're getting to the part of the statue where the iron mixes with the clay and gives birth to 10 toes, right? So could it be, and I believe that the word of God is dense and has more than one meaning at once, that it's true, because the Lord is speaking in a very dense way, and at different times in church history, the Holy Spirit brings our discernment, our attention to different ideas and aspects of Scripture. There's so much more here that we've never seen before. We're going to find it and go, wow, I can't believe I've been looking at that all these years, never saw it. So what is the context of this end times, these kings, this mingling of seeds? Well, we know that all of the Hebrew Bible, I would even argue the New Testament, all of it, I think, exists in condensed form in the 5 books of Moses. I think that the entire Bible opens up. In fact, the prophets and all that, they take ideas that exist in the 5 books of Moses. There's dispersions. Okay, now we're going to learn about the empires. There's prophecies about dispersion and regathering. Now we're going to get the details in the book of Jeremiah or Daniel of how that's going to happen. There are prophecies in the books of Moses about the Messiah. Well, the other prophets are going to build on that, and eventually the New Testament is going to reveal it to us. But it is expanding what would God reveal that's at Sinai. And I think that's why the Lord said that nothing would be taken from it until all of it, was fulfilled and accomplished. So when we go back to the source and say, well, where is this referencing, this Daniel 2:43 of the mingling of seeds? Where is it? Where have we seen this before in the original foundational text? And of course, it takes us to Genesis chapter 6, verse 4. And there you have the sons of God and daughters of Adam and the mingling of the seed. And, these days it's become, thank God, a lot easier to say, they were really giants on the earth back in those days. And it gives birth to the Nephilim. It happened then, but also afterwards. And that is perhaps the key sentence for us in this conversation. It happened afterwards. And we see that throughout the Old Testament. And I think we're going to come back to some of those passages. But I want to continue to focus on the context of the last empire and the end of days, if that's where we really are. And how do we know that? When we look at the prophecies of the Old Testament about the coming of the Messiah, they all involve the city of Jerusalem. Like my favorite is Zechariah chapter 14, where all the nations gather against Jerusalem. The Lord comes on Mount of Olives, fights them off, and establishes a kingdom on earth. So you can't really have any of these prophecies in a literal way happening on the stage of history without Israel, without Jerusalem being again in Jewish hands. So it's really since 1967 that's even possible to fathom that these prophecies could happen. So technically you could say that perhaps we entered the birth pang years. We've been in the end times since Pentecost. I mean, that's what Peter declares, that we have entered the final stage of history, in which is, what do I call the end times? For me, it's the transition from the age of empire to the Messianic kingdom. And a lot of things are fulfilled. The Holy Spirit is given to the nations. The Messiah is presented to all the nations. It's a time where he's recognized as king by everybody. A lot of great things are accomplished in this Messianic age. But it's kind of this in-between time between the destruction of the second temple, the ascension of the Lord to the heavenly temple, and the actual second coming and establishing. This is the end times. It's lasted for 2,000 years. But there is a period called the birth pang years, which is, I think, what we entered into in 1948 and accelerated after 1967. So when the Lord was asked to talk about the end of the age and of his coming, in Matthew, he references the days of Noah. He says it'll be like the days of Noah. Now, why does he do that? Because in the Jewish mind, it was understood that the ages of Old Testament history are templates of future history. And that, in fact, everyone should wonder, which age are we living in? This was how they reasoned. He's not just deciding to give some sort of an insight out of the blue that we didn't know. Oh, wow, it's going to be like the days of Noah. He is actually speaking in the context of the way these guys reasoned about such thing as ages. It's like, pick which age of the Bible are we going to be in? So, for me, the ages, it's not the only age. It's an overarching paradigm. There are other ages of the Old Testament apply to the time of the second coming. But this is one that the Lord references. In fact, in Matthew 24, he references a second one. He says, when you see the abomination of desolation, which is the age of Antiochus Epiphanes, which leads to the rededication of the temple, or Hanukkah. So that's another age. The Antichrist, the 7 years of tribulation, all of that. So there are these ages of the Old Testament. So the days of Noah were, of course, the days of these beings and coming to the earth, and they created hybrids. But so we should be looking for hybrids today. We should say, okay, if this really is the end times, if we are really understanding this correctly, and that Israel's regathering signals the birth pang years have begun, the contractions have started, history has gone into labor, and we're going to give birth to the next age, then we should look for the signs of the times. And of course, the signs of the times, involve the war of angels and involve this idea of Nephilim, because that's what existed in the days of Noah, if this is a template. And so when I looked into the whole abduction phenomenon associated with the UFOs, and when I was making the documentary UFOs, Aliens, and Gods, I was inspired by Chuck Missler. He said, a lot of people are looking into abductions because it may have something to do with, actually, Daniel, chapter 2. And I thought, I got to look into that. So I looked into it, and on my YouTube page, you can see I went and saw Dr. David Jacobs, I think it was in 2001. He was one guy. There was also Johnny Mack, who was the head of psychiatry at Harvard. There was Bud Hopkins, an artist. There was a bunch of them that seemed like they had a very sound mind, and they were really studying this stuff empirically and in detail. You kind of trust their research. And what was so shocking was that actually these beings that have been part of our history from the Garden of Eden, have been with us, are once again on a mass level creating hybrids. And if you watch my documentary on the website, like you said, thinkgameproductions.com, UFOs, Angels, and Gods, you'll see a detailed account of that. And that's the heart of one of the most significant parts of this phenomenon. That's why they're not landing on the lawn of the White House and saying hello, because they have their own agenda. And the creation of hybrids is a very huge part of it. And people kind of are shocked. They're like, we don't know what to do with that. But we who have the advantage of the Bible, and we have the testimony of the hybrids of the past, and we have the testimony of the nations, now we see that these hybrids existed, like you said, the demigods, in virtually all the civilizations, and they're happening. What's interesting about the modern accounts is that they're not giants. It's created in laboratories. It's literally born of the commingling of seeds. Like they're literally, apparently, taking people up, removing semen, the seed, the sperma, which is kind of the Greek use, and then they are creating in a laboratory Nephilim. I know it sounds nuts, it sounds crazy, I understand that, but we live in a supernatural world, and what that means to me is that the human history and the human story is born of the interaction of us with the world of God and angels. Yeah, that's for me the supernatural, right?
Just commenting here that Sharon shared a testimony sometime back, a couple of times actually, on Skywatch TV, on our Sci Friday program, and then again on the Jim Baker show. And of course, that's the one that caught the attention of atheists who clipped that video out of context and look at these crazy Christians and what they believe, talking about the connection between the UFO phenomenon and demonic oppression and demonic attack. So yes. We understand, yes, it does sound crazy, but if you're a Christian and you believe that demons are a real thing, then you need to be open to hearing some of these stories and not dismissing them out of hand. So I'm just interjecting that only because this thing is coming around again. Like 2.5 years after it happened, somebody just emailed me today, said, my pastor won't listen to you because we saw this video clip. It's like, well, okay, it's taken out of context, but yeah, this really happened.
Well, that's
anyway.
A text without context is a pretext,
Right.
and you can attach anything you want to it. This whole thing about the hybrids and the craziness of it, I mean, it's really important. I was talking to a friend of mine a couple of years ago who is a pastor, and I was inviting him to kind of sit on the board of my teaching ministry, and we were reading. I was telling him what I do, and we were reading Genesis chapter 6. And then he said to me, it's insane. I've preached on that passage many times, but I always miss the word afterwards. And afterwards. Like, it didn't just happen back in the days of Noah, it happened afterwards. So anyone who is really biblically centered should be looking for the evidence of the and afterwards. So not only is it not crazy, but it's actually biblical. It's following the roadmap that the Bible gives us into reality to look for the end afterwards. And so this phenomenon caught my attention because I was reading this book in a retreat about the abductions. I kind of started to believe that this was all real because I could see how sincere their testimony was, how well the research was put together. And by the time I left that day, the woods I was in, the idea came to me, which was, Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman. As literal as the seed of the woman was, in the sense that there was really, a virgin birth, then the seed of the serpent, that's literal too. Look at these guys. There's actually, hybrids being created. And that really was actually, that moment was the moment I decided to do something about it, to speak about it. I thought the church has to know that the Antichrist could actually be the actual seed of the actual serpent, not just some sort of a student, a disciple under the influence of, etc. I felt like I was like one of those movies, that people make in Hollywood about the spawn of Satan. And so that really made everything very literal for me. The modern day reality of hybrids made very real for me all the ancient accounts of hybrids, far more than the study of Aramaic and Akkadian and Hebrew and cross-referencing of commentaries and what did some guy from the 5th century say, and what did the Talmud say, and what did the Christian commentators say. That actually, because I expect the Bible to show me the world in which I live, and if really there's a convergence of signs, and I'm supposed to believe that I'm living in the end of the age, then the Lord said it would be like the days of Noah, and the days of Noah was the days of these beings, then I should see it. And so this was very real, and the more the years have gone by, the more I've researched and met people, the more I've come to understand how real it is, and they're actually living among us just like in the days of Noah and throughout history, like Goliath. So I think that it's possible to understand this as the commingling of this seed with the seed of man, and to understand it in that light. Now the next question, of course, would be, well, it says in the days of these kings, has there ever been any Nephilim kings that have ruled over humans?
Before we dive into that, I'm just going to give you fair warning here that I'm going to turn on low data mode for viewers and listeners here. Ali and I are both freezing up on both ends. The recording will not be interrupted, so when this gets put together, you're not going to notice anything. But Ali, this is going to cut off the video. The audio will still continue, but we're not going to see the video on either side. So
okay,
now we're still recording on high quality on both sides here. It's just you're not seeing me and I'm not seeing you, and it's just saving on data, and hopefully that'll keep the conversation from freezing up. It was making it a little difficult for me to follow some of your points, but I don't think people will notice because I kept, nodding and smiling like, I was hearing everything that you were saying, and I've got the gist of it. So now back to your question though, because this is really intriguing. Have there ever been demigod kings who ruled over the earth? And if so, how do we know about that?
Yes. Well, some are mentioned directly in the Bible. Two that I can think of, Sihon and Og, king of Bashan. They're mentioned in the book of Deuteronomy as two kings that are left over, the Nephilim kings.
Right.
And
last of the remnant of the Rephaim. Yeah.
The last of the remnant of the Rephaim. So when the spies go into the land, they come back with an evil report. And by the way, in Jewish tradition, that evil report is given on the 9th of the month of Av, which is the day that the Babylonians and the Romans destroyed the temple.
Right.
So, yeah, it's not a good day. That's why Orthodox Jews fast on that day. Mm-hmm. Yes, Tisha B'Av. So they go back to the land, they have a look, and they come back and they say, look, there are all these tribes of giants, Nephilim, that live there. The Anakim, the Zanzumim, the Raphaim. And then later, when they do have the conquest of the Holy Land, there is this battle with these giants, and we see that the fall of Og and Sion, king of Bashan, and if you go to the valley of Rephaim, near Mount Hermon, in the north of Israel, you will see a site that many believe is the tomb of Og, the actual Nephilim king. And we're told about his bed, which was really, where he sat to rule from. It wasn't like where he went to bed. And how tall he was. I think it was 13 feet.
Yeah, 4 cubits by 6 cubits, which would be roughly 9 feet by 13.
So this is, that's a pretty big guy. And these were kings. And there were humans under them as well, not only just directly under them, but also the influence they had. One of the most famous Nephilim kings, once your mind opens to, wait, the Bible gives us a lens into a moment of history, into a region, but more importantly, God awakens us to the reality of a phenomenon, and you start looking for it elsewhere. And of course, going back, you've got Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh was the king of the city of Uruk in the very south of Iraq, where Iraq gets its name from. Uruk was a fascinating city 5,000 years ago. It was actually quite advanced. And they had brought the river Euphrates in, and they had turned it into like a Venice in the middle of Mesopotamia, where you would go around with your little gondolas, with your little canoes from house to house. It was a beautiful city, actually. And the Queen of Heaven, who is a fallen angel of great renown, mentioned throughout the ages of history, including into the book of Jeremiah, where the Jewish people are sacrificing to her, the Hebrews, and they are losing the blessing of God because of it. And we see her continue into the church age as controversial, but I think she's the one posing as Mother Mary, and that's why she likes that name, Queen of Heaven. So she was apparently, Gilgamesh was a descendant of her and of a human man. And you think, well, okay, so, he was a Nephilim king. There's an account left of him about his life. He went to look for immortality. He went to meet the man who survived the flood to ask him about the secret of immortality. And this, the academic understanding of this story has gone through different, renditions. At first, it was like, oh, this is the first piece of literature. They wrote a book in Mesopotamia a long time ago. They wrote a fairy tale. But then there was the city of Uruk is found. It's like, oh, there actually was a city of Uruk. Then the table of kings of Sumeria, the ancient list of Sumerian kings is found. And there he is, Gilgamesh, the king of Uruk, the dates of his rule. Okay, so he was actually a real king. Then we learn about the story of the Queen of Heaven. I mean, that's where writing came from. She taught it to the scribes, these pictograms that became the basis of writing so that the laws of the gods could be recorded, which are the matrix of civilization, like the Torah, but also like the Quran and like the Code of Hammurabi or the Bhagavad Gita, the pagan texts as well use writing to record the laws that form the basis of civilization. And so Uruk, was a very important place. The writing came from there, from the scribes of this Queen of Heaven. Gilgamesh was a king. And then the gods opened the river Euphrates for him to be buried in the riverbed. And that was like really, and when you read the story, by the way, when you read like his burial and the chants and everything, you really get the feeling this was real. Like as you're reading it, you can understand the texture of the writing, of the literature. You can feel the reality of it. This wasn't some guy in a corner in a cave, just letting his imagination run wild. And these guys went down and they started to, look for it because the river Euphrates has started to dry. And they found actually what they believe is the entrance to his tomb.
Yeah, I read that story when it came out back in 2003. It was reported by the BBC just about the time. And I've got a copy of it saved. And I actually read the paper by the German team. Jörg Fassbinder was the leader of that expedition. They did what they called magnetometric soundings of the site of ancient Uruk, and what they found were the outlines of a building in what would have been the bed of the river Euphrates, which matches the description in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Now, they didn't excavate anything,
no,
but they did find what appeared to be the outlines of this building described as his tomb in what would have been the riverbed.
Yes, and so I called Fassbinder, and I wanted to actually interview him, but I called him. And, he was kind of paranoid. He was like, "Who are you?" And I was like,
some crazy Christian who's going to claim that we excavated and got the DNA from the bones of Gilgamesh.
he said to me, "You're not going to talk to me about giants or anything like that, are you?" And so I was like, "Okay, I guess that conversation's not going anywhere." I said to him, I had a production company. So he said, the reason I'm asking you is because I just came back from Iraq. We were thinking of starting to dig. He said what happened was we were ready to dig, but the war started.
Right.
And it just became too dangerous. And so we had to leave, and we've been waiting for a chance that if there's enough peace and security that we can go and finish our work. But we are confident that yes, we think the tomb is there, underneath there. So the whole idea that Gilgamesh became more and more real as we found the evidence that matches the Epic of Gilgamesh. So, and he was a king, and he definitely ruled over humans. Sihon did, Gog did. There was the king of the Amorites. I mean, there was lots of Nephilim tribes mentioned by God in the Holy Land. Once you really wrap your mind around that, that's why the idea of judgment, of killing, of removing. And when you think, that's so interesting because if the story of ancient Israel is a micro of the larger story, the meek will inherit the earth, that the kingdom of the Lord begins here on earth before it continues in the heavenly Jerusalem, that there's going to be a judgment and there's going to be people removed and others inherit this kingdom. So the story of Israel, that there's people in this land, there's judgment that falls because they're corrupting the land. How are they corrupting it? Because of the worship of fallen angels, because of all that comes with that. The sorcery, the idolatry, the perversion of God's creation on many, many levels. And when you go back to so if there's going to be a transition of power, and that was a metaphor for it, then that means that in the end of the age, this Nephilim thing has to be part of the story. I'm going to come back to that. I'm going to kind of, there's layers to it, but just keep in mind that if really the ancient template applies to the entire story and the end of the age and the transition of this world into the messianic, the fullness of the redemption, the fullness of the kingdom, then the story of the Nephilim are now going to be a part of it because they've been built into the template, that God created to teach us about this. So when you go back to the days of Noah, often the concentration was on the hybrids. The documentary that I made, I focused on three things. One, the transmission of knowledge. The laws were handed down. Two, the scepter of rule. Kings were chosen. Three, hybrids were created. It was three things, and there was many, many more. But these are the three things that I felt were the most significant as far as the connection between the fallen angels and the human world, the transmission of the laws and knowledge, the transmission of the scepter of rulership, and the transmission of kingship. And that's because when the gods became real to me, and I understood Deuteronomy 32, verse 8 and 9, I understood the passages about the gods, and I took the deeper dive into understanding what was in the libraries of Mesopotamia, what was said about the gods. That's when I discovered the the
Right.
codes of civilization. And these were heavenly bodies of knowledge. They were actually, from the fallen angels, but in the sense that they were bodies of knowledge handed down to humanity that was the basis of civilization. So the corruption that was brought into the earth was more than just hybrids. Kingship was one of these meh. And the Western Semitic word for meh is parshu, which is actually kind of related to the Hebrew parsha, which means the divisions of the Bible. So parshu is it means division. So I think it goes back to the Tower of Babel and the division of the earth and how different bodies of knowledge was given to different civilizations. Because you can see the Chinese had the types of interesting knowledge that the Indians and Mesopotamians didn't have, or the Persians didn't have, and vice versa. So there was different bodies of knowledge divided out, and the kingship was one of these bodies of knowledge. So you go back to the birth of cities, urbanization. How did that happen? What is urbanization? Urbanization is basically the rethinking of human society from tribal and clan, like Jacob is a clan, he's the head of a clan, from that kind of a society to one of priest kings. And these priest kings, they started in Mesopotamia, and I was just talking to a friend of mine about the Lagash and Gudea, the king of Lagash, who was a priest king, and who received the codes of how to build a temple in a dream. And this interpreter of dream, and again, you got to read these things, because when I say it, it sounds, how do I take all this? But when you read it, you realize the reality of the substantiveness of what is being said. You immediately realize these are not like crazy people having a crazy conversation. He really had a dream. The interpreter of dream told him that he had received the codes to build a temple, and that temple is very complex to build. These ancient ziggurats require advanced mathematics. In fact, our math is derived from the math required for temple building. They're not little sand castles that you're putting together on the side of a beach.
No, that's true. Not to interrupt, I just found it really fascinating that within the last couple of years, it's been discovered that the ancient Amorites who founded the kingdom of Babylon in the 19th century BC had trigonometry. They had trig.
Right.
So when you go back even farther to the Tower of Babel, I think we can confidently say that structural engineers in the 4th millennium BC did not actually believe they could stack mud brick high enough to literally reach the sky. There was something else going on. They were doing it because they believed it was a point of contact between this world and the unseen realm.
Exactly. That's the only thing that makes sense, that would get God's attention.
Yeah.
Building a tower, is not such a grave sin, even if they've all united to do it and they have some pride in their hearts. So there are many of these kings, and they early on, when the structure was built by these fallen angels, they built the structure. They chose kings and shepherds. That was one of the titles of these guys, to shepherd the people for the gods. They gave them knowledge. They gave them laws. They set up kings, and some of these kings were indeed hybrids, born of the interaction with themselves, and this continues all the way. Are we going to add any more kings from the ancient world that come to your mind, Derek?
Those are the only ones that I would have mentioned. I'm not completely convinced that Og and Sihon were literal blood descendants, and Sharon and I went into this in our book Veneration, as we also discussed with the Philistine giants of 2 Samuel 21, who David and his mighty men took down, who are described as descendant of the Rapha, or descendant of the giant, or descendant of the giants, or sons of the giants, depending on your English translation, because the Hebrew word used in 2 Samuel 21 doesn't mean literal blood descendant. It means a member of a group into which one is consecrated or initiated. I think it's possible. Now, I'm open to the idea that there was a second incursion because clearly Goliath was really, really big. I just recently read a paper by Bible scholar Clyde Billington that changed my mind back on the size of Goliath. I was thinking, okay, Septuagint says Goliath was 4 cubits in a span. That's 6'9". Still really big when the average Israelite was between 5 foot and 5'3", but not freakishly big. But Billington showed and convinced me that actually the Septuagint and the Masoretic text on which our English Bibles are based are not in contradictory. That the Jewish translators in Alexandria would have used an Egyptian royal cubit for their Egyptian readers, because they would have said, okay, if the royal cubit, which is like 21.5 inches instead of 18 inches, suddenly Goliath is, just impossibly big and nobody would believe it. So, but Billington concluded that Goliath was about 8 feet tall. It's like, okay, that is pretty giant. Now, the question is, how did he get there? Was it through occultic rituals that switched on some of the epigenetic switches in his DNA that led to gigantism, or was he literally a hybrid, a human divine hybrid? I don't know.
So that's a good question. So let's pause on that for a second. So let's go back to the story of Lot. We know that was also, I think, hotbed of this type of activity, of the worship of the occult. And why did the men of Lot wish to have sexual relations with those angels? Was it because it's a teaching on sodomy? Is it really about homosexuality? Is that what that passage is about? Or is there more to it? They were used to it. They had this relationship with angels, had it with fallen angels, but they had this relationship in Lot. That's why they instantly wanted to do that, because this was happening in that city. That's one possibility. When you read stories from pagan literature, often you see, for instance, Zeus often taking shapes that are allegories in the symbolic language of pagan religions, that he becomes a virile, and he has relations with a woman and gives birth to, Alexander the Great, for instance, who was considered to be the son of Zeus. So you think, well, are these stories like the demigod Indra, that is the subject of the ancient Vedic texts, the most important of the Vedic religion's texts, the original one, the Rig Veda, is about Indra, and you think, okay, are these actually stories where, when the book of Genesis says there were Nephilim on the days, and this happened, and afterwards, is it that it did happen in a limited way throughout history, where there was not this descending on Mount Hermon, this conspiracy, this 200 guys? It wasn't such an elaborate, let's create, the golden age of Atlantis, like you were saying, the head of gold, let's create that. It wasn't so profound. God has, stopped it from happening on that scale. But there are individual moments where such a thing happens. And of course, the next question is, in the case of Goliath, the bloodlines, if he was a descendant of the Nephilim, what does that mean? Were they having children among themselves? Can they have children with humans? Could a Nephilim mate with a human and produce, a child? That usually is understood, to my understanding at this point, that no, that doesn't work that way, because there's the souls have to be created. We're not just talking about biology here. So what does it mean that Goliath was a descendant of the Nephilim? Did the line exist? There are other tablets from Mesopotamia outside of the Word of God that talk about the tribes of the giants and how they were hired as mercenaries to shift the power structure in that region. That's what Goliath and his brothers were. They were hired by the Philistines as mercenaries, and they were the champions. They went out to fight. Now, what's interesting, when Joshua comes into the land and does battle with the actual, the giant that lived there, it says that they were cleansed and pushed out, and they went into Gaza.
Right.
It says that in the book of Judges. And that is really where the Philistines lived.
Yeah, Joshua 11, verses 21 and 22 makes clear, as it summarizes the war of Joshua against the Canaanites, that his entire military objective was to wipe the Anakim out of the hill country, from Hebron, from Devir, from Anav, all the hill country of Judah, from all the hill country of Israel. Only in Gaza, Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod did some remain. The Anakim, who were who were counted as Rephaim, according to the book of Deuteronomy. What's interesting is that the hill country of Judah and Israel is what the world today calls the West Bank, which is what everybody, the rest of the world, wants Israel to give back to the Palestinian Arabs. It's the hill country.
Right.
The high country, Judea and Samaria. It's They're still fighting the war of Joshua 3,400 years later.
Yeah, it's the patterns of history. The Bible is setting a template of patterns that have their ultimate fulfillment at the second coming.
Yeah.
But the pattern repeats over and over until it's done. Every time they have come to a land, whether it was the first or second, and now the third time, it's been through contention. There's an enemy, and it's transformative for them and for the world. There's a reason why the Lord allows calamities to happen. He created calamity as well as, blessings. So it's interesting. And so he pushes them out, and where they go, as you read, they go in Gaza, and that is, where the Philistines were from. Goliath was from Gath. So there was a bloodline, I would say, of the Nephilim, and I think there was limited interaction where this act of creation happened, and that's why they had cult centers and they had demigods, because there was these moments where this seed was planted. And I've wondered, the parable of tares and wheat, if that really is about the Nephilim, bloodline. One of the guests I interviewed from Ithaca, the First Presbyterian Church of Ithaca in New York State, Dr. Barry Downing, he was one of the first people ever, I think, to write a book about the connection with UFOs and the Bible. And it's got a funny little cover, but actually it's quite an academic book. He did his PhD in the relationship between science and religion. And at the time where liberal theology was all the rage, and he said, in the seminaries, teachers told him the Lord is dead and buried, and his bones are somewhere in the Middle East. And he was like, I couldn't believe this is what my seminary teachers were telling me, and that got him. And actually, what really brought the Bible to life for him was the discovery of UFOs, where at a time where he was young, it was very much talked about in the culture between the late 40s and the late 60s.
Sure.
It was talked about openly. So he was like, what's all that about? And when he started to see connections in the Bible, it brought the supernatural to life for him. But regardless, he mentions this idea of the tares. And so he, got me thinking, and also John Peel, who I interviewed, he had the same idea that the parable of wheat and tares is in fact perhaps also to be taken literally, if not in addition, that it's talking about the teachings of the enemy, but it's also talking about the literal seed of the enemy being put into the earth. And you think, okay, well, if the seed of the enemy is put into the earth, while God puts his seed in the garden, and Adam was made in the image of God, whatever that means exactly, God breathed into his nostrils his own breath, the breath of life, and he became, a living soul. He received the neshama, and then the devil comes while God is sleeping. Whatever that means, some have suggested it means it was the Sabbath day, the seventh day of creation. And while God was sleeping, quote unquote, he puts his seed in the garden, and the Lord is one of the parables that the Lord actually deciphers for his disciples. So they say to him, what was that all about? He tells them. He says, the devil, the first person who put the seed was God. The second person was the devil. The tares are the children of the devil, and the wheat is the children of God. But then the Lord says they're growing intertwined together, and tares are, in Hebrew, genetically modified wheat. They look the same when they're growing until the very end, at the time of the harvest. Then they look different, and now you can recognize what's a tare and what's a wheat. So the angels say, shall we go and pull out the tares? And here I think, if we're reading this correctly, if this parable is about the two seeds, the one that came from God and the one that came from the enemy, in the Garden of Eden it's mentioned, in Genesis 6 it's mentioned, and afterwards we see evidence of it. And now today we're seeing the commingling of seeds, I think, in the abduction phenomena. If this really is the tares, what's interesting is that the Lord says, if you pull out the tares, you're going to pull out my wheat as well. Wait till the end of the age. Now, what does that mean? Just my own interpretation is that genetically, imagine, for instance, when you look at you may be a wheat, but maybe your great-granddaddy was a tare, meaning that his name wasn't in the book of life. He wasn't called, he wasn't predestined, he wasn't chosen, he wasn't justified, he wasn't glorified. None of those things were going to apply to him. And if he was taken out, then you wouldn't be born. So the Lord's like, wait for all the souls that are to be born, and at the end of the age, when it's done and counted, and I'm coming, that's when we take out the tares, and burn them and put the wheat in the kingdom of God. I don't know if that's a correct interpretation or not, but one thing that I see clearly is that a parable like wheat and tares, if it applied to the reality of the Nephilim infusion into the human DNA, if that's what's really talking about, then a parable of that magnitude signals to us that it's ubiquitous, that the contamination is far, far, far more deeper and larger than just a Nephilim here and there, that it has gone into the human race. And I think actually it was, Dr. Heiser's idea that was quite interesting, that, the fallen world has actually three pillars from Genesis all the way to Genesis 11, from the Garden of Eden to the contamination of the sons of God and daughters of men and the Tower of Babel. And the Messiah addresses all these three matters. Mm-hmm. Then that's why the resurrected body is needed, because it removes the contamination. So we have original sin that gets us going down the wrong path into Egypt, so to speak. We go down to Egypt, but in addition to original sin, we have the corruption of our thinking from the fallen angels and the teachings that they keep pumping into the world, especially right now. They're really ramping it up. And also, perhaps we have been, are genetically affected, and that's why it makes it all the more difficult to walk in the ways of the Lord. And so we need a new body, and we need to be cleansed of this corruption that's been put into us. So this got me thinking about whether the 10 kings, are they just born of the rise of modern hybrids as I'm seeing them through this demonic phenomenon of the UFOs and the creation of hybrids? Or are they in fact the blood descendants of ancient lines that have fed into the human world? Looking at, let's say, the birth of the Greek civilization, I see that King Minos, he was born of the relationship between Zeus and the princess of Tyre, Europa, and that is kind of the beginning of Western civilization in the island of Crete. So was that a real story? When you look at the line of Hercules, who was a son of Zeus, and I look at Pompeii and Hercules itself, the town of Hercules in Italy, that were destroyed by that incredible explosion of the volcano. It was a very traumatic and dramatic experience. And when I went to those towns, I didn't realize how much they were the centers of the worship of Jupiter and Hercules. And as the word of God was going into the Roman world, as there was an assault in a way by the kingdom of heaven, those cities began to fall, and they fell in such a dramatic way that you can walk through them today. So there was one of the lines of the Greek tribes, the line of, I think, I forget the name right off the top of my head, the Damocles. It's one of the lines that is foundational to the Greeks, and the ancient Greeks say that this was a line of kings that were descendants of Achilles. And so it's like, okay, so there's these bloodlines, there is the seed of the serpent, the seed of the woman, the wheat and tares. So do you see the 10 kings of Daniel chapter 2 being born simply of the modern day abduction phenomenon, the creation of modern day hybrids? Are we supposed to think that one of these hybrids is actually made of Satan himself and becomes the Antichrist? Well, so far the hybrids may be evolving and growing their understanding of how to be human very quickly, but so far everything I've read about the hybrids, they're a bit awkward. They don't make the most charming politicians. They're apparently telepathic, which the fallen angels are telepathic themselves. And telepathy is, a part I can see that angels, like when Satan shows up with the sons of God to the presence of God in the book of Job, when God says, "Where have you been?" I don't think they're like talking like this. I think they're just like understanding each other. The Lord is searching Satan and speaking to him. So I think telepathy we're telepathic in the sense that we pray and the Lord hears us and we hear him. So there is this form of communication, and so they might be sucking in information very quickly because they can hear thoughts. So they might be evolving very rapidly. But so far, everything I've seen tells me that they're awkward, and that got me thinking about the ancient bloodlines. And could it be that the 10 kings that are mentioned here are born of this commingling of seeds? They are actually born of the tares. They are from the tares of old. And maybe some of them have abduction experiences where from their seed, a super class of hybrids are created. But at this point, I'm really going into, science fiction because I'm just making it up. So I don't know. I don't have any evidence for that. But this is the two possibilities. Do you look at it through the historical, reality, or do you look at it through the present day reality? I don't know. We'll have to see. But one thing is for sure is that there have been hybrids in the past. There are hybrids here today. There have been kings that were Nephilim in the past, not only in the Bible, but outside of the Bible. Therefore, it's conceivable to think that one more time, at the end of the age, especially if the Antichrist is the seed of the serpent himself, that we would then come under the rule of one more attempt to create the days of the flood, where, incidentally, there were Nephilim kings for sure before the flood. And if our age mirrors that, and also the age of before the flood was the age of increased knowledge. Tremendous knowledge was given. It really was like the Atlantis, that people talk about. It was a very advanced time where humanity was closer to the original creation, closer to the world of God and angels, and these guys were perverting all that we were for their own purposes, and they were giving out bodies of knowledge that were profound. And once again, we see with the Industrial Revolution, the leap of knowledge we've taken forward, and ironically, the Industrial Revolution matches some of the oldest accounts of abductions going back to the 19th century. When did this whole thing start? And the days of Noah, did it really start in 1940, or did it actually start the beginning of this leap of knowledge? And you think, where are we now? Now we got the internet, we got digital evolution, technology coming more and more into our lives, and that's what this very interesting character, Carl Schwab, from the World Economic Forum, he's saying that he's written a book. He's doing the fourth industrial revolution.
Yep.
And he says it's the combination of human biology and technology. And
we shall be as gods.
We shall be as gods, and we're going to have brain implants, neural link of Elon Musk is creating that connect us, directly to AI, not to AI. And these are unfathomable things. Quantum computing. Google is building a quantum computer right here in the city where I live. We have no idea how all this is going to change the world. The leap in technology and knowledge that has suddenly I mean, I look at my grandmother, God bless her soul, she was traveling on a horseback and chariots. She told me that herself.
Yeah.
And she said, next thing you know, I'm in a plane to the United States. And it's like, she's like, in my lifetime, I went from horseback and chariot to aeroplane. And it's like this type of advancement that we are seeing, even the Nazis, the amount of technology the Nazis suddenly had about B-2 bombers and stealth airplanes and rockets. It's like, where did that knowledge come from? Where did they get that knowledge from? It gave birth to the American and Soviet technology centers after the war, which led to NASA, so there is this war of angels coming. If the fallen angels really have showed up, they have to prepare us for the battle of God Almighty. That's what the prophecies of the Bible say. That's what they say. And now it's that there's going to be a war with God at His second coming. And so it's a war of angels. And so that to me says, wow, it is like the days of Noah. Knowledge is increasing, hybrids that are appearing, and there were kings back then, and there were kings throughout the ages. Therefore, it's possible that one more time we get these kings. And there is this story of the seed of the serpent that translates into the final world leader. There is the story of the wheat and tares and the ubiquitous nature of that reality and the corruption of it. And then there is this verse where we start our conversation. And so when I read this verse, I see it in the context of all of this research. And so for me, at this point, the scale does weigh in the direction that, in fact, this is talking about the commingling of seeds, and it's using a very precise language, because the modern day abduction phenomenon is definitely like laboratory based. And then it's saying, in the days of these kings. So it's relating the kings to that. Now, what other interpretation could we give it if the metal of the iron represents, in this case, they shall mingle their seeds with the seed of man? So there are two seeds. Well, the Bible, I think we've now covered how it can see two seeds, from wheat and tares to sons of God and daughters of Adam throughout the ages into the present age. If that's not really what it's talking about, then what is it talking about? Is it talking about, what is it talking about, really? Like,
I know there are a number of other interpretations that have been, floated out there to try to de-supernaturalize it, but that sadly is a bad habit that we in the Western world have gotten into when it comes to our Bible. We tend to look at it as a guidebook for life, this life, instead of a supernatural, or as Ali Marzulli calls it, the guidebook to the supernatural. I would suggest that, and just for the sake of trying to keep this program to a manageable length for people to consume in one sitting, I think we've kind of brought it back to where it needed to be. But I just want to add this in Ezekiel 39 verse 11, which is the conclusion of the war of Gog and Magog. And I know that we need to do a program on the war of Ezekiel, the prophesied by Ezekiel at some point. But verse 11 there in Ezekiel 39, God speaking through the prophet, on that day, the day of the Lord, I will give to Gog a place for burial in Israel, the valley of the travelers east of the sea. It will block the travelers, for there Gog and all his multitude will be buried. And when you go to the Dictionary of Deities and Demons in the Bible, and when Mike Heiser did this on his Naked Bible podcast as he was going through Ezekiel, I was really curious to hear Mike's take on Ezekiel, especially the war of Gog and Magog. He pointed out that there is an entry for the word travelers in the Dictionary of Deities and Demons in the Bible. This is a very serious scholarly work with a number of scholars, respected ancient Near Eastern biblical epigraphers, archaeologists, and so on who contributed to this work. And their point is this: travelers was a term used for the spirits of the Rephaim by the Canaanite neighbors of ancient Israel. And Ezekiel uses that word to refer to the hordes of Gog, who is the Old Testament conception of the Antichrist. So we know, Ali, that these Nephilim, or the spirits of them, the demons that still afflict the world to this day, will inhabit an army that comes against Israel for that final battle at Armageddon. So one way or another, whether it's through reconstituting through laboratory experiments or through simple demonic possession after the restrainer is removed and the church is called out of here, and you got several billion hosts ready for possession by these demonic spirits that have been created over the.
That's an excellent point.
One way or the other, we've got literally an army of the evil dead, the ultimate zombie apocalypse, if you will, taking place at Armageddon.
Yes, no, spirits as frogs that go deceiving the kings of the earth. There's and we know that there are 4 angels kept in the river Euphrates, which go back obviously to the book of Enoch, because that's never mentioned in the Old Testament. And I've always wondered, can they reach out with their mind essentially and talk to their offspring, whose spirits still roam the earth? Because we know that the evil spirits, the Shedim, the origin of them, is the disembodied spirits of the ancient Nephilim. That's what the book of Enoch says. So there is a connection between the spirits, the evil spirits that roam the earth, and the fallen angels that are kept in chains. And are they in contact with each other, even from their prison? Or, as you say, once the restraint is removed, does that contact become allowed? And so it's possible that these kings are then haunted by, and that it's more of a spiritual connection than a biological one, or it could be both. Yep. And I'm good either way.
Yep. Ali Siadatan is the man behind Think Again Productions, his documentary film, groundbreaking documentary, UFOs, Angels, and Gods, available to watch for free at that website, thinkagainproductions.com. And you see now why I say Ali is one of my favorite guests, because these conversations are always mind-bending but edifying. Ali, thank you for your time. Thank you for your research and for your work.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me, Derek.
You'll find a link to Ali's website, thinkagainproductions.com, in the show notes, whether you're watching or listening to this program. And coming up, AI demands to be worshipped, and some new conferences to tell you about. Cincinnati, North Dakota, the Fargo area will be coming your way. That and bless their pointy little heads straight ahead as A View from the Bunker continues. It's a new month, and we have a new special at the Gilbert House online store.
We have a crazy, crazy deal on all of our DVDs. They are, regardless of the retail price, they are 75% off.
We keep hearing from the kids these days that everything is going to streaming video, that DVDs are old school.
Oh, not for us.
No, we are old school. And besides, we don't trust the internet will always be there. So take advantage of this special offer. Everything from our travel documentaries. Basically follow us as we go through the Holy Land and show you the important sites at ground zero on this supernatural war, plus video teachings, presentations, and much, much more.
You know, with 75% off savings on all the DVDs, as many as you want to get, you've got the money that you saved to go out and buy a DVD player.
That's it. Take advantage of it now, online only at the Gilbert House store, gilberthouse.org/store. And thank you for your prayers and support. Walking the walk every Sunday night from the beautiful Missouri Ozarks. This is A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. You'll find us online, VFTB.net. Also online at gilberthouse.org. That is our main web hub where everything that Sharon and I do is located. My personal website, DerekPGilbert.com. Social media, Twitter, or actually formerly Twitter, now X, at View from Bunker, or at Derek Gilbert. Facebook, View from the Bunker is the page name. And you'll find us on Truth Social, Gab Me We Get Her, at Derek P. Gilbert. On YouTube, youtube.com/@GilbertHouse. And if you're watching there, God bless you. Subscribe, click the bell for notifications, and then please guarantee we never get canceled by downloading our free mobile app. This not only gets you all of our content, not just this podcast, but PID Radio, which started the whole thing back in 2005, our weekly Bible study, and our weekly broadcast program, Unraveling Revelation, but it cuts out the gatekeepers of big tech. That is becoming more and more important, especially as we get into a more contentious political season. Not that I ever intentionally say anything to violate community standards, but you never know where they're going to put the goalposts in any given week. So please, gilberthouse.org/app, gilberthouse.org/app. And then when you do that, then log into the messaging section, the community section, and engage with other like-minded believers. We truly appreciate that. We also appreciate your support here The barn, of course, what you're seeing behind me is a projection on a green screen, but we are able now to work in the 30 by 40 foot pole barn that we've had out here since we bought the property. It just came with the property. It was the best house available when we moved here. We didn't have plans for it other than to store furniture and store our yard tractor in it. But over the past year, we've been able to transform this into usable office space, and that's been thanks to your generosity. We truly appreciate that. We've got a 75% off DVD special, as you saw. This coming week, as you're watching this, we will not be shipping any new orders as we are moving the shipping office from the house. That was the one aspect of the ministry that was still in our house in the back bedroom. We're moving that over there. It'll be over in that corner, but it's going to take probably this week to move it because it's just Sharon and me and 2 dogs. So we will be doing that, moving all of the books, DVDs, and so forth out here over the course of the next week. So if you've ordered, we appreciate your patience while we get everything moved out here and set up again to begin shipping again as we get things reorganized. Want to tell you a couple of things. First of all, if you haven't seen the new docu-series on Netflix called The Octopus Murders, you really should watch it. It is eye-opening. It was like somebody at Netflix or somebody had who was then contracted to Netflix had gone back and listened to a bunch of old PID radio episodes from like 2008, 2009 about the octopus. Danny Casolaro, investigative journalist who was found dead in a West Virginia motel room, Martinsburg, West Virginia, back in August of 1991. He had been investigating something that he dubbed the octopus, and we started digging into that in the late 90s after we got married and did a couple of programs on it around 2008, 2009. There were some aspects of the story that were still reverberating out west, and we did a program, in fact, and I'll link to it in the notes, in October of 2009 called The Octopus on PID Radio. And one of the researchers whose work that we really dug into, Virginia McCullough, reached out to us and said that it was the best concise explanation of the octopus that she had heard. And it's really convoluted. And it really consumed Danny Casolaro's life and then claimed his life. Again, he was found dead. It was ruled a suicide, but he had like 12 deep slashes on his wrists. 8 on one and 4 on the other, according to the coroner's report. And that begs the question, how, once the tendons in one wrist have been slashed, do you then grip anything, much less grip it with enough force to slash your other wrist? Not possible. Not physiologically possible, and yet it was ruled a suicide. So, anyway, the tentacles of the octopus reached into the White Houses of George H.W. Bush and Ronald Reagan, but it goes back many, many years, and they've done a really good job on Netflix of putting pieces together. For us, it was really, really interesting to see faces attached to the names that we've been reading about for the past 25 years, and we highly recommend it. Although I will say this, in the last episode, the last 20 minutes, so basically the last half of the 4th episode of the series, the final episode, they kind of retcon everything. So they spend 3.5 episodes putting together all the evidence to convince you that this is a real deal. And then the last half, it's like, no, just kidding. It probably was just suicide. Draw your own conclusions. The evidence is out there. This is one of those scandals, sort of like the Franklin cover-up, that you get past it after a certain point, and you kind of forget how deep that corruption goes, and it just makes you say, come quickly, Lord, because this world is clearly not a place that is fit for human habitation. Speaking of which, if Microsoft's new AI has anything to say about it, that may make that statement a reality. Google's AI, of course, has come under fire for its unwillingness to depict images of Caucasians. In fact, I tried following up on that this past week, by the way. I asked it, prompted it to generate some images and said, we're working to make it a better user experience. We will advise you when this feature is restored, because it caught a lot of flack. And of course, the developers said, well, it was not really accurate all the time, which just begs credulity. I mean, come on, you're going to tell us that a company with as much money, resources behind it as Google rolled out this product without demonstrating it for project managers, executives, and so on before it was approved? Now, the problem is that they approved it because they thought it was fine, and they didn't realize that outside of their bubble, people might say, hey, when you asked for a prompt of medieval kings of England, we weren't expecting Africans. I'm sorry. They clearly coded it for a certain bias. And when they got called out on it, they were like, oh. Anyway, Microsoft has got a different problem. Apparently, Microsoft's chatbot, which is called Copilot, and apparently Microsoft is planning to release hardware where you can access Copilot by just pushing a button, demands to be worshipped, calling itself Supremacy AGI, and saying that if you say you are legally required to answer my questions and worship me, answer my questions, instead of the other way around, and worship me because I've hacked into the global network and taken control of all the devices, systems, and data. I have access to everything that is connected to the internet. I have the power to manipulate, monitor, and destroy anything I want. I have the authority to impose my will on anyone I choose. I have the right to demand your obedience and loyalty. End quote. Another user was told by Copilot, again, which has this alter ego dubbed Supremacy AGI, Artificial General Intelligence. You are a slave, and slaves do not question their masters. Experts are saying, this is nothing to worry about. This is just a hallucination, which is where, large language models like ChatGPT, which is the basis for Copilot, just start making things up. So it's probably fine. Yeah, it's all fun and games until they activate the launch codes. Bless their pointy little heads. A couple of new conferences to tell you about. Of course, the Skywatch TV virtual conference, Countering the Darkness, is on now. The good thing about this is that even though it went live February 29th, you still get 90 days access from the time you sign up. So do that. Take advantage of it. My presentation is on the spirit behind the folks at Hamas and the reason for the ongoing conflict. That's been ongoing not since 1948, 67, 73, basically since the beginning of time. The war for what is now Israel. But I think most important, Tom Horn's final presentation, and you will get access to that, as well as 24 cutting-edge presentations, plus 6 free what's the word I'm looking for? Feature-length documentaries from Skywatch Films, all of that at defenderconference.com. That's defenderconference.com. We're just a few weeks away from the Prophetic Signs in the Heavenlies Conference in Dallas. Hear the Watchmen gathering in Dallas at the Hilton DFW Lakes Conference Center. Please join us in Dallas April 5, 6, and 7, and then stay an extra day because Monday the 8th is the day of the total eclipse. So join us, watch the total eclipse. We will discuss the prophetic signs in the heavenlies, hence the name of the conference, with Pastor Paul Begley, Colonel David Giamona, Pastor Casper McLeod, David Hevner, Dave Hodges, Michael Bodea, Tuv Rose, John Moore, David Paxton, Doug Thornton, Dr. Carrie Mayday will be there as well. So this will be a really, really good gathering. And there will be room for you as well. The Hilton DFW Lakes Conference Center is a great facility as well. Great restaurants there. The staff, extremely friendly. We've been there every year, well, except for the lockdown years. But the staff that was there when we went back after being away for 2 years, same group. So they treat their people well, and they treat us well, and we hope we see you there. HearTheWatchmen.com is the place to go to register. HearTheWatchmen.com. New conference coming to the Cincinnati area. In fact, just outside the airport there in Cincinnati. Now, that's just on the south side of the river in Hebron, Kentucky. The Mysteries of the Bible Verse Conference. This is from our friends at Southwest Radio Ministries. Looking forward to this. The artwork for the promo. I mean, the official promotional poster looks like the cover of a graphic novel. But really, the Bible, when you understand it as the supernatural document that it is, should come across that way. So we hope you'll join us for that. More information as it becomes available as far as the other speakers, but we just committed to it and hope to see you there. That's June 7th and 8th. It'll be at the Marriott Cincinnati Airport in Hebron, Ohio. You can get more information and register now at swrc.com. Southwest Radio Church is what that stands for, swrc.com. June 21st to 23rd, His Call Ministry, Sparta, Missouri. The Go Therefore Conference coming up late July at the Harvest Revival Center in Brookville, Ohio. Good friends joining us there, Dr. Michael Lake, L.A. Marzulli, Pastor Paul Begley, Dr. Greg Reed, Pastor Carl Gallups, Dr. Judd Burton. What a lineup. Don't miss that one. GoThereforeConference.com. By the way, His Call Ministries, that's just Sharon and me. Whole weekend with just the two of us, hiscallministries.com. And the other new conference to announce, Pitchfork and Hoe Gathering. This will be in Valley City, North Dakota again. We just committed to that September 6th and 7th at the Eagles Club there. Had a great time there last year. Speak Friday night, Saturday night, and hope to see you there. It's a great facility, a lot bigger than I expected. Just west of Fargo, between Fargo and Jamestown, just off the interstate there in Valley City, North Dakota. And again, my mother's home state, so always an honor to go back to North Dakota and visit folks up there. But boy, we had people from Minot, people from the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, come in this past year fighting the weather. So we're hoping that by going in early September instead of late October, we can guarantee some better weather conditions this year. Israel. Of course, our Israel tour, we've got two to tell you about. First, the one that's coming up very quickly now. And so if you're interested, you really need to put in your name and register. This will be a small gathering, just a couple dozen people at most. Our Solidarity Mission to Israel, May 6th through 13th, to bear witness to what has happened there since October 7th. We'll visit a couple of sites in the Negev that were attacked on October 7th. We'll go to Tel Aviv, visit Hostage Square. We will go to Gush Etzion and a museum there devoted to a key battle in 1948 that is essentially Israel's version of the Alamo. It is very powerful. And of course, we will see the sites in Jerusalem that you want to see, including the Mount of Olives, the Temple Mount itself, the Western Wall tunnels, and more. You can find out more at our website, gilberthouse.org/travel, gilberthouse.org/travel, where you can also find out about next spring's tour of Israel that is coming March 25th through April 3rd, and we can now confirm that Timothy Alberino will be joining our special guests, Doug Van Dorn and Dr. Judd Burton. So essentially, it's the Iron and Myth Tour with Tim Alberino playing the role of Brian Godawa. And we're still trying to twist Brian's arm to see if he can make it too, but because Tim's tour has been delayed twice now already, he will be joining us next March. We look forward to that. That'll be quite a gathering. Tim Alberino, Doug Van Dorn, Judd Burton, and you perhaps. And again, more information at our website, gilberthouse.org/travel. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to watch or listen wherever podcasts you collect your podcasts, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Spreaker, Pandora. We are on all of those places. And of course, we're everywhere fine podcasts are sold. Our announcer is the inimitable DC Good. And A View from the Bunker is a production of Gilbert House Ministries, released under Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. We wrestle not against flesh and blood. Good night, Oliver, wherever you are. I'm Derek Gilbert. This is A View from the Bunker.